when you spoke a language in the past, you have to be careful. So I have to correct also what you said in the presentation, and I have to be fair with you. I'm no more CEO of Wallonie-Bruxelles International because I retired 1 month ago. And if I have a recommendation to you, is to wait for your 65 years age, because it's marvelous. When you were civil servants during many years, you have the impression to be free. You create your own enterprise, and you can so provide recommendations freely to others. So many thanks also to Mrs. Chomich to have paved the way for universal rights of the rural women. So you see what I will try to speak with you, to elaborate with you, is the cultural diversity and the minorities, so the protection through regionalism. And you see that protection means, in many cases, liberation, so it's more or less the same for me. As French-speaking Belgian people, I will do the promotion of one exhibition in the northern Belgian region, Flanders. It's in the Museum of Art of the Daily Life in Antwerp. And there you have young artists from several countries of Europe and of the world paying attention to what's diversity and what's identity. And so they recommend us to be careful because you have to avoid to be classified. Sometimes you have not the intention to be classified, and so you have the right to be member or not of a community. And there are two feelings: how you feel your personal identity and how other people sees you through a supposed identity. So the general idea is to reject two general classification of human beings. So identities, and that's what I call the group approach, are sometimes, and we can say often, minorities in a definite perimeter. But the minority of today can become the majority of tomorrow because, for instance, they will have the independence or they will receive autonomy in the framework of a federal country. So that's what I call the perpetual motion. And when the minority become majority, they have also to respect the minorities they have on their own territory. And I think that Vojvodina is a good example of recognition of other minorities than the Hungarian on the Serbian territory. So there is also the approach, you are not alone, because that's, I think, an obligation to work, to live, to build with other people. And to build with other people, you have to first to build yourself and to be in confidence with yourself and having a good idea of what you are. So that's what we can call to be in peace with yourself and with other people. And so I insist about that, the right to belong or not to a community. And so, of course, there are some dangers in those approach. The first is that we see in the world a global tendency about standardization. All seems to be the same. And so there is a dangerous effect that people have the impression to be not seen or to be not recognized. And so that's the first danger. The second danger is what the Appadurai, the author from Indian origin, has called the fear of small numbers. When there are not so many people in a group, it seems that there is a natural law asking them to be more numerous, and to be more numerous, sometimes they become more aggressive and they practice the exclusion of other people. And so there is also a third danger is what we can call communautarism of reject and exclusion. So what I say is my personal opinion, and so it can be sometimes difficult to express views about that. But there is, for instance, the difference in the Muslim world again among the Shiite and the Sunnites, and I know that some people in my friends had problems in a country because their name was not sounding from one religious community, and so he was rejected by the two communities because he had no sign to be member of one of the two communities. And so I think it's a basic approach to see that humiliated communities take high and aggressive colors and behaviors, and you know that they have the impression not to be seen, or that other people seek other people and not them. And so there is also the martyrology of the human bombs, and sometimes the willingness to destroy the other because he is different, or sometimes also to use the other for organizing new resemblances and having so the possibility to say to colleagues, together we are not like him, we are different. So to say it very shortly, there is a huge problem, and we know that there is maybe an international law for solving the problem, and I'm not sure that it's so, because the international law is weak, because it is not self-executing. And so take the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in '84, so there is no distinction of any kind, so everybody is equal, and there is no possible distinction through color, sex, language, religion, national or social origin, and the status of the country or territory to which a person belongs. And of course, education is the major tool to promote tolerance, understanding, and friendship among all nations, all people. And so that's very, very nice, but the means to having a situation like that are not so efficient. And so there is also the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and I know that Serbia will be president next year of the OSCE. That's the famous Helsinki Declaration. So it's maybe a little more precise than the Declaration of the United Nations. That what is interesting is to see that they consider, that's the last sentence in the slide, that their frontiers can be changed in accordance with international law by peaceful means and by agreement, so not by aggressive attacks. And sometimes we see actually in some countries. And so there was also text coming from the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE about the importance of the electronic medias and the importance of minorities language teaching in link afterwards with the UNESCO Convention of the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. It's of 2005, that's the convention, and it was a global vote in the UNESCO, and the main idea is to give to the countries, to the states, the right to support their own cultural products and to support that financially too. There is, and that's, I think, the more precise text that we have, the Council of Europe with the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities. So that's the right to be treated and to choose to be member or not of a national minority. The principle of equality, minority-majority, the promotion of the mutual respect, it's the cement to improve the global existence and the global life. There is the language freedom, access to the media education, and that's the possibility for members of national minorities to have contacts, to sign agreements with other minorities or other people, other countries across borders. And we are here in the example of Vojvodina with Hungary. That's the example in geography that closest to us. What is a national minority? I think it's important to know that. There are 5 conditions, 5 criteria. To reside on the territory of the state and to be citizens of a state, to maintain strong ties with that state, to have distinctive characteristics at the ethnic, cultural, religious, or linguistic level. 4th criteria is to be sufficiently representative, to have a kind of critical size, and to be smaller than the rest of the population of the state where they are located. And last and not least, to be to have the motivation to preserve together what constitutes their common identity, including tradition, religion, or language. You see there that it was not so easy to give a definition of what's national minority. And what do we find in the text about the European Union? There is, in the Treaty of Lisbon, the general principle of respect for human rights, including the right of persons belonging to minorities. In fact, it's a criteria that was taken into account, for instance, in the consequences for exclusion or, what is more important, accession of a new member in the European Union. So that's a kind of democratic principle that new members have to take into account. So federalism is the basic principle, I think, to respect the minorities and to have a harmonious life inside the different territories. And you know, I think, the 4 principles. The first is the principle of autonomy. It gives competencies and powers. You need powers for carrying out your competencies to minorities. The second principle is participation. You have to be involved in the organization of federal works, federal bodies, federal institutions. The third is the famous subsidiarity principle. So the decision power has to be located where that's the more efficient to solve some problems. And the 4th principle is the supremacy of the law, so the control of the courts and the Supreme Court when there is a claim, when there is a legal problem. And the key in all that, in the proximity to the citizen and this principle of subsidiarity, to have a very efficient organization And diversity as principle is a kind of part of what I call the golden triangle. Diversity means otherness, so you express your identity in non-aggressive terms, and you are curious and you try to know how the other are built and what's their feelings, what's their culture. And the third part of the golden triangle is the universality, so the existence of universal rights, and those rights may not be in contradiction with the rights of the minorities, cannot be in contradiction with the universal rights, for instance, gender equality. And in the otherness principle, there is a kind of civic duty to express its identity in a positive way, peaceful, convivial, and tolerant towards other people. I think that Belgium can be a good example of that. Globalization, it's an expression by a Canadian author called Courchaine many years ago. So that's the mix between global, because we know all what happens in the world, and we can reach every point in the world and every person in the world in real time, and the local, because we are also members of local communities, and we try to change the life in also the municipalities and the local communities. And maybe 30 seconds about Francophonie, because Francophonie is also an expression of cultural diversity, that very different countries, very different people from Africa, from the 5 continents, trying to build a kind of community with some global actions they take together through a multilateral institution called International Organization of the Francophonie, with the topics of culture, language, but also peace protection, peace prevention, education, and other topics. And so they built a kind of global law, not self-executing too, so that's the general weakness of all what is multilateral. And the Francophonie will organize next year a forum, and I'm the General Commissioner of that forum, called World Forum for the French Language, and the topic is the creativity in the Francophonie, and the idea is to welcome young people in Liège, economic capital of Wallonia, to exchange ideas, but also to present their projects in the fields of economy, culture, education, and civic involvement and participation. So in the Francophonie, I have seen some people from the south saying it was a victory, this UNESCO convention about the cultural diversity, and so we have to take that into account, to accept that there is no gender equality in our country. And so that's the reaction, the global reaction was, it's not possible because there are the universal rights of the human being. So the minorities need a global legal order. Is it to be territorial or personal? My answer is the two criteria, because when you give competencies to a minority in culture, it's linked with the people, and when you give autonomy, for instance, in land planning, it's the good example, or in economy, it's linked with the territory, and that's also the diversity of Belgium, to have legal institutions based on the people, that the communities, or based on the territories, is the regions, and they are working together with the same members of parliament in Belgium. Also, the principle of disappearance of the complete homogenization, because all has not to be always the same. There is also the question of the competencies, economy, for instance, to have the possibility to develop its own community, and also the right to be associated with a state from the same cultural origin. I think it can be included in an international order for the minorities. And so, with also a basic statute for that, I'm dreaming about an international text for recognizing that, with in the principles the existence of a joint council with the other communities on the territory for improving the knowledge, the mutual knowledge, and having a mutual recognition. So it can be, for instance, language courses in the other language, for instance, language of the minorities. Also the possibility to valorize the economic potential, to valorize the economic links with other countries, to be associated to policies of the central states, for instance, to have quotas in the civil service. I know that it was one provision in the Ohrid agreements regarding the Macedonia, with 23% of people from Albanian origin in the police. So it can be a good lesson for what happens in Ferguson and Missouri, actually. And also the idea of joint cultural policies with other states, and the possibility for the minorities organized in regional communities to have their own international relations without the control of the central state. That's what also happens in Belgium, but I know that Belgium is the only country in the world where the regions and the communities have the right to sign international treaties when there is a link with their domestic competencies, and it doesn't exist in other countries in Europe or in other continents. So that's also the global principle of the fit-to-fit geometry. There is no a global model. You have to take into account the balance between the autonomy and the integration, and to make very convivial the relation with the majority. And when the relation is of good quality, you can allow significant transfer of competencies. And for instance, it's difficult to transfer the competency in nuclear policy, but it's not difficult to transfer the competency in cultural policy. Is it necessary to build a kind of international organization with all the minorities in the world? Why not? I call that an international. It can be an institution by minorities for minorities. They can appoint experts in prevention of the conflicts. They can organize a kind of international court for the minorities, and they can organize a kind of action right to the domestic courts in the different countries. Jacques Attali was very careful about what he called the state's proliferation. You know that the number of members of the United Nations was dramatically increasing those last years. I don't think it's a danger because there are rules in the multilateralism, and the benefit of multilateralism is that when country is equal to another country, he has one vote. And so state proliferation is not a problem when it appears that it's not possible to organize autonomy, and that it will be more peaceful to allow the independence, and it's also a kind of international democracy. Complexity is an added value, and it's coming from the coexistence of minorities and majorities. Complexity is only the description of a situation, the real picture of a society, and complication is not the same. Complication is a wrong picture of a reality, making it less simple, less clear, and more labyrinthic. That's why I react always when some people say Belgium is a complicated country. It's not true. That's a complex country, and complexity is an added value. So complexity is a mosaic made from cultural diversity, from the history, of course, what happened before, made also from territorial specificities, the state of economic development, the level, the existence or not of natural resources, and the creativity potentialities influenced by all the other factors, but diversity is a real ingredient for creativity, for being more creative. So we can say that a well-balanced management of complexity is a factor of peace, and peace means also to be in accordance with all the neighbors. Which kind of management? So you respect the autonomous rights of the cultural communities, you give them the opportunity to participate to the central power, you take into account the burden of the history, and there are countries where the burden is more heavy than in other countries. You create areas of dialogue for prevention, for added value. You take cohesion measures, like for instance the European regional cohesion policy, for decreasing or cancelling the imbalances in the regional development, and you fertilize the different creativity potentials. You give the possibility to act and to elaborate with different people. The example of immigration, there is a quotation of Perec. Immigration is always an added value, and I take the example, to be short, of some training sessions organized in my region, Wallonia, for giving to immigrated people the possibility to work with the local companies for being closer to the economic opportunities of their country of origin. So through immigration, the Belgian enterprises are stronger on the foreign market, and it's very important. That's a real value in economic life, and you know that some countries like Belgium are very dependent on exports. And we can discover also together what I call the perpetual motion. If a region becomes independent, they will have to solve and to organize a system for protecting the local minorities that they have. So don't forget, and it's also in my conclusion, that the multi-phase dimension of the human being is a reality, because every human being is different from all the others. You can be binational because of the immigration. You can belong in your country of origin to a linguistic or religious minority, and you are actively located in one of the most promising regions of the country. So that's a kind of cocktail, and it makes the reality very rich. And so there is an art to manage complexity. That's to take into account all those situations and to give everybody the possibility to draw, to define his own way. And I think that's the best recipe for peace. Hvala lepo. I thank you for your kind attention.